I don't know if it's really a good idea to keep talking about alignment, but I had a really fun conversation with my friend Sean about this, among other things, and it just seemed useful to run back through the history of different alignment constructions. And I will try to do that, and will probably get bogged down in weeds here and there due to some of the weirdnesses that pop up. Also, the Wikipedia entry is not grossly wrong, but it does seem to miss one or two details or say things that don't seem quite right to me. So, for better or for worse, this would be my reading or my look at this topic. So, if we go to 1974, we have law and neutral and chaos. And pretty straightforwardly, law is abiding by the fact that you live in a society at all, and chaos is not. And you could say individualism or something if you want to, but it kind of seems to be more almost a psychopathic or barbarous, kind of notion from a certain perspective. Neutral, as I recall from 1974, I'm not sure neutral is ever really quite very explicit. I could be wrong. Somebody might want to correct me on that. I haven't touched that text for a really long time. But as I recall, people were lawful and orcs were chaotic, and you sort of graded anything else accordingly. Well, very simple, really. When Holmes comes out, things get really interesting because we've got basically a 2x2 grid. There's law and chaos, and there's good and there's evil. And it's not very nuanced. You have in the middle of this 2x2 grid sort of this node or a cutout called neutral. And if you go by what you see in the monsters, which is kind of the best guide to what on earth this means, and they even put creatures in there on their little diagram, it breaks down pretty nicely, actually, into what the critters are like. Neutrality is difficult. Again, there's this question of, does it mean really individualistic, which kind of contrasts or clashes, I should say, with the individualistic aspects of chaos? Or does it mean out of bounds? I mean, we don't worry about what the alignment of, a bear is. The bear doesn't care. It's being a bear. So what on earth is it, really, is kind of a good question. That becomes more complicated, actually, as we continue to make a more elaborate grid, but that's one of the weeds. Anyway, so that is the Holmes version. And speaking as somebody who's playing in an advanced D&D game that kind of is interested in those corners, which are the entirety of this diagram, lawful evil is awesome. I mean, lawful evil is like so rich in play for NPCs, for player characters, it's so full of playability, including for people who aren't lawful evil. Just having them around just makes them pop. So I like that grid. Looking at the Holmes one, I find it very unconfusing. You definitely have to decide how to play it, which I'll talk about in a minute. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and a whole lot of questions, you want to raise your hand and say, I have questions, especially when you look across the monsters and you see that it's a little confused. Is pagan neutral, or is it chaotic? Other questions appear when you look across the versions. In Holmes, orcs are chaotic evil and goblins are lawful evil. In AD&D, they're both lawful evil. So that's weird. And then there's other questions too. Why is an Umber Hulk, a subterranean predator, never described as anything except basically a nasty animal, chaotic evil, whereas a displacer beast is neutral? Is that it's kind of otherworldly dimensionality coming into play? I mean, but aren't they both basically just scary predators? I mean, what is this? So in fact, the inexplicable character, the Displacer Beast, one would think that that would kind of go with chaotic as sort of disordered in a larger metaphysical sense, rather than the Umber Hulk, which seems more like basically, a bear. Whatever. Do you see what I mean by the weeds? I mean, things get really kind of mixed up in trying to figure out what they mean. But taking that as a given and not getting entrapped by it, it's these structures that interest me. We go to this 9-grid one for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and as I understand it, that persists through the use of the term advanced in other titles. But then we split, of course, or continue the split that had been created with Holmes versus Advanced. And we continue along the Holmes trajectory, and we get to BX, Basic and Expert Set, Moldvay and Cook. And in that one, we have kind of a reversion or a version of the original construction, a little bit more explicit, I think, in terms of what they mean. You have law, and you have neutral, and you have chaos. And it also says that law grades toward good, that if you're lawful, good behavior, good things often tend to get done. And then inside chaos, if you're going to be chaotic, then bad things and more evil work tends to emerge from it. So it's more of this, the little linear picture. That is preserved in the elaboration of that text into the Menser version in 1983, and then the 1985 re-release of it. That is, so I guess that persists all the way through that lineup, through the Cyclopedia, all the way up into 1994, all the elaborations of that line. So they're really different. And then if we look at 3rd edition, we see yet another kind of construction or model of this. And then 4th seems to go with the 9-grid. And then we look at the 4th, and we see more of a Moldvay picture, but it's its own thing. In 4th edition, what you have is unaligned, meaning a person who doesn't really have time for other people's, ideologies, or really runs around trumpeting one of their own. Think of them as not a specific position. It's the first one that says that, quote, neutral just means ordinary for a human, not ordinary like for a bear, but ordinary for a person. And then going anywhere else is a dedicated ideological step. And it's very much a personal opinion in that edition. It's not a cosmology. And so, the deviating from unaligned means either being good or being evil. And those are very clearly defined, and they're pretty basically defined too. Nothing. What's interesting, though, is they kind of reverse the Moldvay picture, because then good people, if they get really extreme and in imposing and supporting goodness, they get lawful. So it's not lawful good. It's that's what lawful is. It's the intensity of your effort, of your structured approach toward your goodness. And then chaos is taking evil past the point of being kind of a dick into being psychopathic. You simply, it isn't going to work. I mean, if you're chaotic, what you're doing isn't going to work, and you're good with that. So that's the 4th edition picture, which I also find to be very, very, very different from, for example, the Holmes one that I like, but I also like this one. It's just a very different thing. They make sense in terms of looking across their component parts and seeing actual categories or presumptions, playable presumptions. Never mind whether I think they're philosophically, profound or not. And so forth. I mean, I'm not going to go through every last little thing. If you want to go digging into 5th edition to find out this, that, or the other, you go right ahead. But I'm saying that we have extremely different constructs and interrelations of the different forms. And those forms don't always mean the same things. Neutral certainly never means the same thing, often not even in the same version. I mean, in the same publication. And if we hold a goblin steady, right, through the whole line, of all things, if there's one thing I think we can hold steady through the whole line of Dungeons and Dragons, it's a goblin. And then you'll suddenly see that their alignment is, different here and there. And you're going, well, that's funny. I mean, they must mean different. The goblin's the same, so it must mean different things. So anyway, it's not anything I plan to answer. I'm just bringing up some of the questions. And I haven't even talked about whether alignment is presumed to be prescriptive, this is how I play, or descriptive, this is how I have played. I've talked about that previously, and that's a whole different question of its own. Here, I'm just kind of interested in these different constructs.